Hello again. I think that most of us know that the best universities in both Britain and America engage in various cunning schemes to ensure that their student bodies have a good proportion of black people in them. If they did not do so, then institutions such as Harvard and Yale in the United States and Oxford and Cambridge in this country would have hardly any black students at all. The reason that this is so is not relevant. It is enough that it is so, and that the courts in America have ruled that such practices violate the 1964 Civil Rights Act because by deliberately increasing the number of black students, it militates against students of Asian heritage who often have higher marks. The truth is that without such enterprises, the best universities would be full only of white students and those of Asian origin. For many people, it is quite acceptable to rig the odds in this way, the reasoning being that because of historic prejudice and slavery and various other things, African Americans are less likely to gain top grades at school and therefore need a hand to get on. In Britain, a technique called contextual offers works towards the same end by identifying those who need a little help to achieve their potential. In both countries, such practices work against the interests of white people and those of Indian or Chinese ancestry, and in favour of black people. When efforts were being made to abandon such schemes in the United States, and the United States Department of Justice was pursuing Harvard for restricting the intake of Asians and artificially boosting the number of black students, a leading scholar on racial equity was furious. Sean R. Harper, who was at that time head of the Race and Equity Center at the University of Southern California, was quoted in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette as saying, "Is the Department of Justice saying that it is in favor of Harvard being 100% Asian American? Because if we are looking just at test scores, it could very well be that those with the absolute highest scores would be Asian Americans." Let us compare this with something said almost 50 years earlier by a thoroughly unrepentant Nazi, a man called Dietrich Allers. Allers was a lawyer who played a major part in Nazi Germany's euthanasia program, T4, which saw more than 70,000 mentally ill and disabled people murdered in gas chambers. He spent years in prison after the end of the Second World War for his complicity in these crimes. In 1971, Gitta Sereny, who was writing Into That Darkness, a book about the death camp at Treblinka in German-occupied Poland, interviewed Dietrich Allers. Talking of the situation in Germany in the early 1930s, before Hitler came to power, Allers said the following: "I remember when I said I wanted to study law, somebody in my family took me to the Ministry of Justice in Berlin. We walked along a corridor and he told me to read the names on the office doors we passed. Almost all of them were Jews." You see, on the one hand, we have a man who worries that there might be too many Asian Americans at Harvard, and on the other, somebody who thought that there were too many Jews in a government department. Both anxieties are the same and founded upon a similar mentality. There is in both cases an assumption that once the matter has been described, hearers will immediately see the nature of the problem. This is taken for granted when such statements are made. How could anybody not find the idea of a corridor full of Jewish names on its doors an affront to be rectified? In the same way, a university full of students whose families have their origins in China is plainly unthinkable. It simply cannot be right for Jews or Chinese people to do so well, and there should be some provision for ensuring that Gentiles, white people and black people are not squeezed out by these pushy characters. That essentially is what both the head of the Race and Equity Center in California and a senior Nazi from the T4 euthanasia program are saying. Far from preventing or discouraging racism, some of the most vociferous advocates of anti-racism today have simply changed the target and are still convinced that this or that minority is getting more than its fair share of jobs, houses, or places at elite universities. In this way, the militant activists of racial justice find themselves using precisely the same arguments as Nazis who were convicted of complicity in mass murder. I find this a curious situation, and I think it should give us pause for thought.